abuse and possession of a biological agent. She was purposely seeking this out with the intent of poisoning her roommate.
We considered each other family, we called each other our sisters. That was really painful for me.
How far would you go to win a custody battle? Imagine a friendship forged in the crucible of shared experiences, only to be shattered by a betrayal hatched in the darkest corners of the internet. This is the story of Janie Ridd, once a close and trusted friend, whose journey from trusted confidant to killer was fueled by greed and a desperate desire for custody, a desire that led her to the dark depths of the dark web. This story uncovers the shocking truth behind the sinister plot, the lengths she was willing to go to achieve her twisted goal, and the chilling consequences of her actions.
20 years in prison. This after confessing she tried to poison and kill her roommate and best friend.
County woman booked into jail and charged with the possession or use of a weapon of mass destruction.
The spine-chilling story took place in Utah, United States, and was so intriguing that it got featured on a Netflix series. From a happy, unbreakable friendship to an evil, masterminded murder attempt with a biological weapon, there are many twists and turns to this story. However, there's no doubt that it would make you or anyone else think twice about having a roommate. Janie Ridd was a native of Utah and was born in June of 1969 and later met Rachel in 1995. At the time, Janie was barely 26 years old, while Rachel was 4 years younger. Both women came from very different backgrounds and also had very different personalities. While Rachel was outgoing and energetic, Janie was described as being socially awkward and not so social. Notwithstanding, the two women became very close, very fast. It was barely months after they met when they became roommates. Rachel was fresh out of a divorce, living with her parents, trying to rebuild her life. Janie, on the other hand, was living alone, haunted by a past trauma. When thieves broke into her apartment and left her feeling vulnerable and unsafe. The two women had grown close, and the idea of moving in together seemed like a perfect solution. Janie craved the security of having a trusted friend nearby, while Rachel saw the opportunity to regain her independence by leaving her parents' home. For both women, it appeared to be an ideal arrangement. Janie would have the companionship she desperately needed, and Rachel would escape the awkwardness of living with her parents at a time in her life when she should have been standing on her own. What seemed like a mutually beneficial plan, however, would soon take a dark and unexpected turn. Moreover, it seemed like the two women were the perfect match, as they both influenced each other to do things they wouldn't normally do. Janie, for one, helped Rachel manage her finances better, while Rachel encouraged Janie to go out and date. And so, moving into Janie's apartment seemed like the perfect plan, a happy ending for both women. But time would later reveal that this was, in fact, a grave mistake. Initially, the women treated each other like family, and even referred to each other as sisters. According to Rachel, she felt at home in Janie's apartment, and was actually happy. However, she also disclosed that Janie had a certain controlling attitude and would often manage all the household finances, as well as Rachel's. Janie was the older one and had more experience living alone, so it was an understandable setup. However, Rachel would sense some friction in their friendship whenever she went dating or hung around with men a lot. Rachel was a big-time extrovert who loved to go out and have fun. The fact that she was in her 20s only made her all the more enthusiastic to enjoy her life. Despite their close friendship, Janie would often become uncomfortable or upset when Rachel stayed out too long or seemed to be enjoying herself a bit too much. Rachel, trying to be a good friend, would invite Janie along on many of her outings. But it felt like Janie only wanted Rachel all to herself. Both women were single, with no significant others in the picture, but Janie's behavior often bordered on possessive. Rachel found herself covering up or overlooking Janie's attitude, chalking it up to her friend's need for companionship. But eventually, Rachel decided to confront Janie about her possessive tendencies. Janie dismissed the concern, claiming she was just looking out for Rachel, trying to protect her from guys who weren't good enough for her. Yet, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Janie's protectiveness went deeper, hinting at something more troubling beneath the surface. Rachel's friends were often uneasy about Janie's possessive behavior. Some speculated that Janie might have developed romantic feelings for her and wanted more than just friendship. However, Rachel dismissed these concerns, confident that they were just close friends. Their bond, which had grown over several years, felt more like sisterhood to Rachel, and she never entertained the idea that there might be something deeper at play. By this time, their friendship had spanned over a decade and was strong enough to weather almost anything, or so Rachel thought. Working as a paramedic, Rachel had built a stable life for herself, earning a decent income, but in 2010, about 15 years into their friendship, life threw her a curveball. Rachel developed a herniated disc in her back, a condition that occurs when the soft center of a spinal disc pushes through its tougher exterior, often causing intense pain, numbness, and weakness in the limbs. The condition severely impacted her ability to work and live comfortably. As Rachel struggled with her health, the dynamics of her friendship with Janie would soon shift in unexpected and troubling ways to reveal a side of Janie that Rachel had never fully recognized before. Her condition was quite serious and required serious medical attention, even making her stop working. This meant all the house bills were on Janie. But then, Janie didn't complain and agreed to sort things out herself. And just when Rachel thought things couldn't get worse, she discovered she was pregnant. This was good and bad news for both women, as their excitement would change quickly when Rachel said that the father of the baby was out of the picture. And so it was dependent on the two women to nurse and take care of themselves and the child. Rachel gave birth to her son, Ryder, but soon after he was born, he was diagnosed with autism, and to top it all off, her back injury flared up again and left her in constant pain. Janie cared for both mother and child, and as luck would have it, her job was flexible and gave her enough time to care for the two roommates the best she could.
That was one of the major questions we had to answer is, what's she going to do with it? What does she want a biological weapon for?
Right.
And so as the investigators started to dig into it, what they realized is that she had a tumultuous relationship with her roommate and one-time best friend. In our court filings, we've referred to the victim in this case by her initials, and so I'll do that today as well. RB. Janie Lynn Ridd and RB had been friends for more than 2 decades, roommates. RB had a minor son who had some learning disabilities and challenges, and Janie Lynn Ridd provided care for both RB, who was in poor health, and the son.
Still, unwilling to give up, Rachel underwent surgery for her condition. It was getting out of hand and would leave her paralyzed if she did nothing. After the surgery, Janie took charge of her friend's finances and personal issues, ensuring the smooth run of things. At this point in her life, Rachel was completely vulnerable. She had no job and no one to take care of her except Janie. Seeing the love and support she had been receiving from her friend and roommate, she made her the sole inheritor in her will, but that would prove to be her undoing. Over time, Janie would later seize another opportunity, a special charity program that paid her for taking care of Ryder as a half-orphan. This made Janie become even more invested in her nurturing of the young lad, so much so that as time went on, people started to think she was Ryder's mom. Whenever Rachel would accompany her son for some event at school, folks would refer to Janie as though she were Ryder's biological mother. Rachel didn't know it yet, but in truth, Janie had been telling people that Ryder was her son. The fact that the two were always seen together made it very believable. Of course, Rachel wasn't too happy with this, and subsequently she began to have arguments with her over who got to spend more time with Ryder. But then, fate seemed to favor Janie once again, because Rachel got subjected to several more surgeries in the years following Ryder's birth, meaning Janie got to spend even more time with Ryder, while delving even deeper into her role as a home nurse for her friend. The immense support Janie showed her sick friend was enough to win the heart of anyone. However, Rachel would soon learn that her friend was far more sinister than she could ever imagine.
Through the investigation, what we learned is that Miss Ridd intended to poison and kill her one-time best friend, RB, in order to take custody of the child and cash in on a $500,000 life insurance policy.
The shocking revelation came on the 20th of June, 2018, when Rachel received a letter telling her that her dear friend had sued her to claim full custody of Ryder. Initially, she was furious and confused at the same time. It all seemed too unbelievable that her best friend and roommate of over 25 years would want to separate her from her only son. However, her doubts were cleared soon enough when she confronted Janie to inquire about wanting full custody over Ryder. Janie had simply replied with one word: yes. Feeling betrayed and enraged, Rachel called the cops and tried to tell them how she was being separated from her son. However, what she didn't realize was that Janie had also filed a protective order, thereby forcing a wounded and sickly Rachel to leave her house. Poor Rachel ended up staying in a hotel, from whence she fought the legal battle to regain custody of Ryder. And just in case you're wondering how exactly Janie managed to sway the cops to take a child away from his biological mom, all she did was make Rachel look like a bad parent who could harm the little boy. You see, due to the pain and post-surgery injuries Rachel suffered, she was given some strong medication by her doctors, including opioids and other drugs that would normally be abused by drug addicts. Janie knew all this, so she decided to use it to her advantage. She mentioned that Rachel was using these substances in high dosages, but left out the part that it was all under prescription. Child Protection Services were led to believe that Rachel was an addict and therefore unfit to care for Ryder. In the end, after law officials and Child Protection Services had a discussion with Rachel, they figured out the truth about her condition, and after it became clear that Janie had lied in her claims of being the rightful custodian of the child, they took Ryder back from Janie. It took about 10 days before Rachel finally regained custody of her son. Immediately after, she moved in with Ryder to a family shelter. It's needless to say, this epic fallout between two best friends was truly heartbreaking, and Rachel found out she had no choice but to cut ties with her friend. The situation at the family home wasn't altogether favorable, but she endured nonetheless. Up until when she received a call from Janie, a call that would change the course of her life forever. Janie had contacted her friend and convinced her to meet up at the park. There, she apologized for the whole lawsuit and protective order and begged Rachel to come back to living in her apartment. It seemed like a genuine offer at the time, and Rachel didn't hesitate much to oblige. Perhaps she felt she had no one else to cater for her in her condition, or maybe she thought her roomie had genuinely turned a new leaf. But then, this decision turned out to be the biggest mistake of her life. By the following year, in April 2019, Rachel once again needed attention after a back surgery left her with an open wound. Of course, Janie was there to nurse the wound as usual. However, Rachel noticed that after her friend nursed the wound, she ended up experiencing more pain than she normally would. Confused and increasingly worried, Rachel would ask Janie how her surgical wound was healing. And, as always, Janie would reassure her that everything looked fine and that it was healing well. But despite Janie's reassurances, Rachel continued to experience unusual and persistent pain. Eventually, the wound began to swell significantly, prompting Rachel to seek urgent medical attention. When she finally saw a doctor, the news was alarming. Her surgical wound had become infected with MRSA, a dangerous type of bacteria that is typically associated with hospitals. MRSA, or methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is a particularly stubborn and dangerous strain of bacteria, resistant to many antibiotics. What puzzled the doctors most was how Rachel, who had no history of prolonged hospital stays, had contracted such a severe infection. The doctor treating her admitted he had never seen a case as severe as Rachel's. They immediately booked her for emergency treatment, reopening the wound to clean it out and administering powerful antibiotics to fight the infection. Although Rachel was cured of the infection, her relief was short-lived. Later that year, she developed the illness again, and this time, it was even more sudden and severe. She woke up in the hospital with dangerously low blood sugar, a condition that baffled her doctors. Given the bacteria involved, it would have made sense if Rachel had diabetes, but she had no history of the disease. The medical team was left puzzled, forced to consider the possibility that the MRSA had somehow re-entered her system through an unknown and sinister means. Meanwhile, the last thing Rachel had recalled was how she had received an injection from her dear friend and fallen into a deep sleep. After her treatment again, they had to explain the situation to her and then let her go home. But again, she was back 2 days after with the same disease. This time, she was kept in the hospital for 8 days. Doctors ran all sorts of checks, trying to figure out what was causing the sudden drop in blood sugar levels. They tried all they could but found no cause, so time after time they kept discharging her, so they waved it aside and sent Rachel home after treatment. But she came back often until the doctors started to suspect that the substance was being injected into her system, although no one could figure out how. At first, the doctors and her friends were suspecting that she was probably injecting herself with insulin, but the sick mother of one wasn't the cause. The whole thing made her very worried and afraid for her life. So much so that she'd sometimes eat spoonfuls of sugar before bed so as to get her blood sugar levels up. But this was still not enough.
We considered each other family, like we called each other our sisters. When I was reading my statement, I could see her. She didn't care. Strangers seem to care more than she does. That was really painful for me.
After getting discharged, Rachel seriously deteriorated, and that made her seek emergency treatment. On one occasion, she showed up at the hospital with another cut, injected with another form of deadly bacteria, which was usually found in the lower intestine of humans and animals. However, the climax of everything came in October 2019, when she later developed 3 massive infections in her surgical wounds after a recent surgery. Before this, she and Janie had gotten into a big fight over Rachel's will. She had wanted her to change the contents of the will. Of course, when doctors found out that it was after this fight that she had developed these infections, things began to look a little suspicious. Initially, under the caregiver arrangement the 2 women had, Janie was set up to get full custody of Ryder if anything were to happen to her. But she wanted to change that and make her father the legal beneficiary instead of Janie. Janie wouldn't allow it. To top it all off, she noticed that Janie seemed a lot darker than how she was when they became friends. She slowly began to suspect foul play and started thinking of moving out to stay on her own. Again, Janie wouldn't allow it, urging her best friend to stay until Christmas, so she once again decided to oblige. Unknown to her that her friend was about to pull off a trump card that would make her gain custody of Ryder forever.
What our investigation revealed was that there were early instances where Miss Ridd was obtaining insulin off the darknet and then injecting it into RB. On 2 separate occasions, RB went into a diabetic shock, almost in a coma-like state where had medical professionals not intervened, it would have taken her life. And what we saw as we dug into the case was that Miss Ridd had first tried to use the court system to take the child away from RB, but when that failed, she resorted to poisoning, first with insulin, and then when that didn't work, she escalated the attack and sought a biological weapon with which she could kill her roommate, RB, and likely get away with it.
It was that same year, in October, that Janie logged again onto the dark web, contacting an anonymous vendor selling biological agents. This was after previous purchases of insulin and other material she had injected into her friend. She was looking for a bacteria, specifically VRSA, another deadly bacteria quite similar to MRSA, but equally very lethal. Janie posed as if she was a biology teacher working at a college preparatory school in Utah and needed the bacteria for science experiments. The vendor wasn't quite at ease with Janie's request, even after she claimed she needed the bacteria to carry out scene experiments on antibiotic resistance. You see, VRSA is quite dangerous because it resists most drug treatments. Also, why would a school teacher access the dark web to get something for a school project research when she could just get it legitimately? But Janie pressed forward with the purchase until the vendor finally yielded and granted her request. In addition, she even paid extra cash for overnight shipping so she could obtain the bacteria faster. From all indications, Janie was eager to get her hands on the deadly bacteria, which she would use to carry out her sinister plan. Little did she know that she had just laid the perfect trap for herself with this single purchase, a trap that would make her end up in jail. You see, Janie's anonymous vendor on the dark web was not a genuine source. In fact, all along, she had been speaking with an undercover law enforcement agent. This was why, at some point in the conversation, the vendor even suggested she should go to a legitimate source. If Janie knew better, she should have spotted this as a red flag, but she didn't, and it would all turn out to be her own undoing. After paying for her sinister package with $300 worth of Bitcoin, the FBI packaged and sent over her order, but it was fake. They delivered the fake VRSA to the spot she chose, a UPS store in Holiday, Utah, not too far from Salt Lake City, where Janie resided. They had actually grounded coffee and stuffed them into a plastic container before with smaller containers packed full with fake bacteria, and everything arrived on December 17th, 2019 at Janie's predetermined spot. The FBI already had a good idea of who Janie was at this point, and also dug up her previous attempt at gaining custody of Rachel's kid. And so they decided to tail Janie, find out the truth, and possibly nail her. Janie didn't pick up the package until the next day, and after she did, she drove off to a parking lot to check the items before driving off to work. She had no idea that the FBI were on her tail. It wasn't until after some agents approached her at work that she knew she was in big trouble. They quietly approached Janie and asked her a few questions about the package she just picked up. She lied initially, claiming it was simply a package of raw coffee. But they were not fooled because they had everything on record. According to her, she said that she had picked up a package that day and explained that she believed it was just coffee beans, as someone had said they were sending her some. She decided to add a bit more and ask if there was something unusual inside that she should worry about. But that didn't fly. So when she saw that the officers weren't buying it, she changed her story and claimed the package contained a biological item she intended to use to make beer in her basement. Of course, this was a far more foolish story to believe. Who makes beer with a weapons-grade biological material? The agents knew exactly what she ordered. They simply wanted to know her purpose for wanting such a dangerous substance. After further pressing and intimidation, Janie changed her story once more and said the package contained staph, which was a type of bacteria she intended to use for experimental purposes and to satisfy a personal curiosity she had as pertaining to her roommate's recent exposure. Though she denied that she was attempting to harm her with the biological agent, according to her, she wouldn't even know how to do that, and added that her best friend of 25 years was like a sister to her, despite their occasional arguments. However, the cops decided to search her and found 3 pills in her pocket, which she claimed belonged to Rachel. She was immediately arrested, but then this was only the beginning, as more shocking revelations would follow in the coming days. Officers later proceeded to search Janie's apartment, and what they found was no less than totally shocking. In fact, from evidence gathered at Janie's place, it is believed she must have attempted to harm or kill her roommate on several occasions. That's because authorities found traces of dangerous substances, including ketamine, Xanax, and E. coli bacteria. They found several hypodermic needles in Janie's apartment, as well as an expended insulin injector pen that had Rachel's DNA inside it. By the time the FBI went to reveal everything to Rachel, she couldn't believe it. In fact, initially, when they started asking her questions, she kept saying positive things about Janie, talking about how they've been friends for decades and how she's been the one nursing her all this while.
We considered each other family, like we called each other our sisters.
Even when law enforcement officials showed her the stuff her friend had ordered on the dark web to poison her with, she still thought there had to be a mix-up somewhere. It took a while before she began to connect the dots and realized that Janie was the one responsible for her frequent hospitalizations all along. All the time she ended up at the hospital with critically low blood sugar. Janie was the one who had been injecting her with insulin while she was sleeping. Janie Ridd was 51 years old when she was arrested, and 3 charges were subsequently labeled against her. The charges were attempted possession for use of a weapon of mass destruction, attempted aggravated abuse of a vulnerable adult, and aggravated abuse of a disabled or elderly person. In 2020, she was charged to court, and in June that same year, she pleaded guilty to the first 2 charges. The 3rd charge was later dismissed on August 25, 2020, after a long back-and-forth battle at court. In court, her defense attorney wrote that the reason for his client's actions was because Rachel had become more verbally abusive and harmful, to the point that it was affecting Janie mentally. It was quite the eye-opening court session, as the defense accused Rachel of being abusive and mistreating Janie. The defense also claimed that Janie was only trying to debilitate Rachel in order to gain legal guardianship of her son, Ryder. According to them, she did what she did because she cared too much about the child she loved and protected. She said she had lost her mind and basically went crazy. As disturbing as the attorney's words were, they seemed to paint Rachel in a bad light and argued that Janie had about 1 million chances to kill Rachel if she really wanted to. And she could have used more direct methods like stabbing or strangling given how sick and near disabled Rachel was. But she didn't. But her lawyers didn't buy that too. However, there was another side to this story. While Rachel's ailment benefited Janie due to her acting as Ryder's caregiver, her death would have benefited Janie even more. This was due to the $500,000 life insurance policy that was part of the deal. At some point during her prolonged illness, Rachel had purchased a life insurance, and the deal was that whoever took care of Ryder in the event of her passing would inherit the $500,000. As the sole guardian of Ryder, Janie was the one set to receive this massive amount, and Rachel had even stated her as the beneficiary and guardian. And so, it could be that Janie wanted her dead all along, but wished to commit the murder in such a way that it couldn't be traced back to her. Or maybe she was just not an effective killer.
Yeah, the level of sophistication that Miss Ridd applied to her crime was nearly unprecedented. And Miss Ridd's defense was to try to make her seem more like a traditional attempted murder, more like a crime of passion. And we did our very best to explain to the judge in this case, Judge Carapetta in the 3rd District, that this was unlike any of the other crimes of passion that she might have seen. This stretched over months and months of intentional infliction of serious pain and suffering, and culminated with this attempt to obtain a disease to kill her roommate, her one-time best friend.
These were the questions the judge and everyone in court found probing as the case unfolded. Even Janie's lawyer didn't in any way deny that her methods were extreme or make her a criminal worthy of punishment. The fact that she purchased a biological weapon right before COVID made it worse for her lawyers, especially when the judge and jury witnessed what actually happens during a pandemic and how it affects lives. She was definitely not winning this one. However, considering certain factors, Rachel's lawyer chose not to add attempted murder to the list. However, regardless of not being charged for attempted murder, Janie's crime was still bad enough to have her locked away in prison. After the trial came to a conclusion, Janie was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the first charge and 5 years in prison for the second charge. The sentences were meant to be served consecutively, meaning she was doomed to stay in prison for 20 years. Both Rachel and her attorney seemed okay with the outcome of the trial, agreeing that justice was served. According to her, during an interview after Janie's conviction, she said that Janie had watched her suffer and then made it even worse. When the first attempt didn't kill her, Janie injected her with 3 doses of E. coli instead of just 1, which would have left her in excruciating pain. Rachel found it hard to believe that someone she had known for 25 years, her best friend and roommate, could do something so terrible, describing Janie's actions as pure evil, meticulously planned and executed. Rachel also revealed that her friend may have conceived the idea of injecting poisonous substances into her body through a TV show. She recounted how back in March 2019, she and Janie watched a true crime show in which the killer used insulin to murder his victim. Both women later had a discussion that night, arguing over how effective insulin could be as murder weapon. Reports from the police had already mentioned that insulin was one of the substances found in Janie's apartment. This, amongst the many other substances, was what led them to believe that Janie had been long trying to murder Rachel. Interestingly, Rachel also believed all of Janie's atrocities were as a result of her obsession over Ryder. At some point, Janie had become so attached to the boy that she began to think of him as her son. And for the fact that the boy's biological mother was still alive, she could never see her dream come true. And so, after an attempt to separate Rachel from Ryder by court order had failed, she opted for a more direct approach. However, she was probably afraid of going to jail, so she deferred from committing homicide, rather opting for other tactics that would make Rachel's death look like a medical complication. Rachel's assertion wasn't wrong. Her ex-roommate was truly obsessed with Ryder, because even from jail, she was overheard telling another inmate that she knew what was going to happen and that she was going to find a way out of prison and a way to get Ryder back, still insisting that he needed to return to her by all means. True to her words, Janie did get out on parole after spending just 25 months. And now she's out there and no one knows what she's up to, though sources claim she's under tight supervision. Meanwhile, the victim, Rachel, on her own part, disclosed that it would take a while before she'd be able to fully move on from the psychological, physical, and emotional effects of what her friend did to her. For her, the most traumatizing part of it all is how unremorseful Janie was about the whole matter, even after she was convicted. Rachel couldn't believe this was the same person whom she shared 25 years of her life with, the same person trying to kill her to claim her son and life insurance. A lot of individuals feel Rachel didn't get sufficient justice for all she suffered at the hands of her roommate. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos like this. Bye for now.